Morning, everybody. I was kind of glad to see some rain today. We planted broccoli there at the experiment station, and we had trouble getting our irrigation going. So now they've been irrigated. And I enjoyed what David said about horses and mules and everything. And I was thinking about how I fit into that. I think I'm a donkey because I'm too short to be a mule. But anyway, I'm gonna talk about some things that I've been seeing this year, some things I've been noticing across the state. One of the things in particular of most interest to people is what we call SDS, or when you see soybeans that are starting to crash in spots across these fields, especially after they move into R6 and they're starting to fill pods. It was like it happened all at one time, 1 week. It was like everything was going along pretty good, and then all of a sudden these dead and dying spots started to appear, and you get the very typical symptoms with the interveinal chlorosis and necrosis. Some of the areas that you might see would be as maybe 4 foot square. Some of them might be pickup truck size, scattered across the fields, and everybody's kind of wondering what's going on. And so what I've been doing, I call it, I'm conducting an investigation. So what I do is I look at every case that's reported to me, and I get information on the variety that it's occurring in, the tillage practices, the rotation of the field. I collect samples, take pictures of the foliar and the symptoms in the vascular system, and that's one thing you got to be real careful about. What you're seeing from the road or the pickup truck, or when you walk out there, that's a symptom, and that's all that is. So it's kind of like a fever. When you take somebody's fever, that's just a symptom of something else going on. So when you see that, you need to look down at the base of the plant and the roots. And because that's what's causing that. It's a vascular disruption. Something's disrupted the vascular system, and in a lot of cases, that disruption probably started around planting time or a little after planting time. A lot of these root pathogens, and specifically the SDS pathogen, Fusarium virguliforme, that particular pathogen does most of its work when in cool, wet soils. So earlier planted beans are more likely to be infected by this particular Fusarium, and it's the same with a lot of Fusarium vascular diseases. The earlier you plant in cool soil, the more likely you're going to have a problem with it. No different from this one. So it's not something that you're looking at the result of something that happened a couple months ago. Now what happens is when those plants, when they shift to hard reproduction and they start to pod fill, there's more of a demand for water and nutrients to finish pod fill. And when they do that, when the demand increases and the vascular system is compromised, those plants can't keep up and they start to crash. And that's what you're seeing, plants crashing from a poor vascular system. And I've gone out in some fields, and what I told some of the agents I was with, I said, well, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to stand right here in the middle of this bad spot, and I can typically reach over and grab a healthy plant and pull it up. So I pull up an affected plant, and then I pull up a healthy plant within arm's reach, and the root systems look vastly different. The root system of the affected plant is very small, potentially decayed. Obviously, the healthy plant's got a larger root system that doesn't show the amount of decay. That decay did not just occur. That decay and those root problems started early on. You're just seeing the result of it because the water and nutrient demand has suddenly increased, and you don't have enough plumbing to feed the plant because of that. So that's what causes these late season crashes, and especially when it's hot. So if it's hot outside and your evapotranspiration is higher, transpiration rates are more, water demand is higher, they're really going to crash. So that's why you see it when you see it. It's more of a reproductive shift, heat, variable things, and it's a result of having a poor root system and a poor vascular system. Now I'll take when I pull these up and look at the roots, I also examine for nematodes. Now, nematodes can cause a lot of this as well. You can have bad enough nematode damage in the absence of a fungal pathogen that will cause vascular discoloration, that will cause the symptomatic, the intravenous chlorosis and necrosis. Not always vascular discoloration. You might see some, but you'll see the same foliar symptoms. And I've pulled up several plants that were heavily galled with root knot nematode. Or they were reduced with cyst nematodes. Cysts are a little hard to see, but I see them. I've looked at enough roots now. If I've got a hand lens and I see the little white pearls on those, which is the cyst females, I can see those on the roots. And what we normally do during this investigation is I'll take those plant samples and we'll take tissue biopsies from the lower parts of the plant to try to get a fungal pathogen or something or fungal-like pathogen. And we'll also take a soil sample that would be a regular diagnostic sample for nematodes, about a pint of soil that's taken right where those plants are going down, and then we'll take a look at them. In some cases, I see high nematode pressure. Sometimes we're in these dead and dying areas, I don't see any problematic nematodes. Sometimes I see vascular discoloration, sometimes I don't. So I'm trying to piece all this together, because we're looking, every time you see these plants going down, it's not always the same thing causing it. Okay, so and I think we all call it SDS because it very well could be SDS. It looks like SDS. But when you say SDS, to me, being a plant pathologist, technically, my mind goes straight to disease caused by Fusarium virgiliforme. And it's also made worse by nematodes. So if you've got SDS or another soil-borne pathogen and nematodes, you've got, it's a multiplier of how much problems you're going to have. Those nematodes open entries into the roots and you get more disease. So it exacerbates that problem. Sometimes I see that. Some of our worst fields that we saw last year and some of the ones that we're seeing this year with the worst dieback also have bad root knot nematode problems. And then so people ask me, well, if I've got SDS, what's something I can do about it? And that's the Fusarium virgiliforme. And we see some of that. We actually isolate some of it. If it was just that, I could tell you, grow a SDS resistant variety and a nematode resistant variety. So that variety optimally should have a good nematode resistance package and SDS resistance. Because if you grow one with just SDS resistance but not nematodes, the nematode damage can almost overcome a good bit of that resistance. I've seen this in other crops, can overcome the benefit of the resistance, and you'll still get a lot of disease. So I think both of them, and I think if you grow nematode resistant varieties, first and foremost is going to be a big benefit. The other thing that you could do to avoid SDS, plant later. That's not popular to say because I think the shift is more towards early planting. Most every outbreak I see was planted in April. Not all of them, but a lot of them were April planted full season bean. And it's mainly because that's an optimal time. Those cool conditions, those cool soil conditions are more conducive for disease development early on. Beans grow off, they look great. Then you see the result of that early planting later in the season when you see plants crash. It doesn't happen all the time, but it happens some. It's kind of like everything's variable. I can ride by 100 acre, thousands of acre soybeans over here and maybe see 2 or 3 fields that have bad spots in them, and I see them all because that's what I do when I ride down the road. I look at fields, and I go straight. What's causing that? I went to a pumpkin field day last week, and we parked. It was over in New Kent, and I parked next to where we were going to go eat. On the way out, there was a soybean field right beside it, and I said, "Something's wrong with those soybeans." I didn't know whose field it was. I just stepped out there, pulled up a plant root knot nematode. So you see these things, and so there's it's not always one thing or one answer that causes these spots to crash. And it's something. What I'm trying to do is get a feel for it so that we can be better at identifying what it is, so we can reduce those losses. I don't have a lot of answers yet. I gave you my answer about sudden death by, with resistant cultivars, maybe avoiding early planting. I think there's data that shows that some of the seed treatments, especially the group 7 fungicide seed treatments like Allevo and Saltro, have been shown to increase yields in the presence of nematodes and SDS. So I would, they're fairly expensive, so you need to identify a field that you've got a problem in or had a historical problem in, and that's, if you want to spend the money on a seed treatment, that's probably not a bad place to spend it. Is it going to get you where you want to be as far as nematode control? Those seed treatments work pretty well in low to moderate pressure. If you've got really high pressure, you're still not going to like what you see, but I can tell you it won't be as bad as it would have been had you not done it. But see, that's one of those things you can't see. Had you not used the seed treatment, you don't know how bad it would have been. All I can tell you is in my trials, this year, just looking at visible differences, I see a little bit of benefit in high root knot populated field. So what am I getting on most of these in my investigations? I get a lot of Diaporthaphomopsis. As a plant pathologist, I use a lot of Latin names because that's how we communicate to each other in plant pathology, which is it's aggravating, but that's the only thing I know to call it. Diaporthaphomopsis is a complex of Diaporthaphomopsis organisms, so they call it a complex. So there's several species of fungi that are in that complex, and so when I see those, when I pull them out in these isolations, I get a little bit different growth patterns. I get a little bit things that look a little bit different, and so I'm actually sending the isolates off to have them identified using molecular tools, because I'm not geared up to do that in my lab currently. So we're hopefully after this season we'll have a better picture of what we're getting through this investigation that I'm conducting. That's basically how I look at it as an investigation. Now, other things that I'm looking at when I talk about I talked a lot about nematodes. I'm looking at nematode resistant varieties. I've got some strip trials out in the state with growers, replicated strip trials, looking at different levels of nematode resistance, different sources of nematode resistance, trying to take a look at some varieties that have Peking source of nematode resistance, side by side with the R3 nematode resistance, which is in most of our varieties. So we're all, basically when we're planting, if you look at the description of a variety and it says R3, that's a PI 88788 source of nematode resistance. It's only resistant to race 3. If we keep planting those over and over and over again in the same fields, what could happen is you'll see a race shift. So those nematodes will find a way to overcome it, and when they do overcome that resistance, bingo, you've got a new race. That's how races are developed, is they overcome resistance genes. So what my long-term goal is to do is to try to integrate using rotating, not just rotating soybeans, but rotating resistant genes in some of these fields. So if you rotate something like a Peking in that's got a different source of resistance, or if mostly what you're going to see is Peking and R3. You don't really see any other resistance in commercially available cultivars. But if you rotate these resistance genes in the same field, it slows that race development down. It gives them it breaks that cycle a little bit, and then you throw in a corn crop or another crop that's not a host for cyst. You break that cycle up, and so it's a long-term effect of doing that gradually decreases your nematode populations over time. A lot of times we think in terms of trying to reduce nematode populations, reducing nematode damage in 1 year. The best way you can do that is get a resistant variety. So if you've got a good resistant variety, something with Peking resistance or R3 or the PI88 combined with Peking, but the key to that, if you got that, so why it comes, there's typically a cost associated with that. So there's a yield drag, or sometimes those varieties don't yield as well. So you've got to trade off some yield for nematode resistance, and that's going to depend on your population. So if you've got really high populations and you plant a good resistant variety, that variety is going to shine. even against one of the better yielding varieties. If you're in a moderate to low population, there are a lot of times that high yielding variety that doesn't have resistance will beat the nematode resistant variety. So it's all dependent on the populations in your field. You've got really high populations, that's when the nematode resistant variety will shine. If you got moderate to low populations, sometimes the higher yielding variety is a lot of times it'll beat it. Just because there's a yield drag or reduced yield associated with that variety that's got the nematode resistance. It's a lot of information because there's a lot of varieties. We're testing some of the ones, we're just taking basic examples in some of these strip trials and testing them, and we're doing them with and without the levo seed treatment. So we're trying to look at the combined effect of the seed treatment and nematode resistance. But those trials are ongoing right now. We've got one trial in a heavy cyst field, and we've got another trial in a heavy root knot field. The root knot field looks great. You can see the different varieties just standing at the road because of the root knot pie. That's actually when I can see differences in treatments from the road, I'm a happy person, and so I'm real happy about that one. Not seeing as much with the cyst, but hopefully we'll be able to get some differences on those. Dr. Holzhauser has graciously offered his services with helping me get those harvested. So we can get the yield data on those. But we have been collecting, and you did tell me you were going to do that, David. I see you back there kind of going, But anyway, we've been getting soil samples on those, so we've got the nematode numbers on them. And what we're going to do, and I need to start wrapping this up, don't I, Joseph? Okay, you think I need to stop? All right. One thing I am going to do, just real quick, in problem fields that I get across the state where we've got high nematode populations, I'm going to try to characterize the root knot and cyst nematode in each field. So I'm going to do HG typing to determine the race of cyst nematode in those fields. We're going to do root knot ID. So when you get a nematode sample report back, it either gives you a color code or just numbers. It doesn't tell you which race it is, or it doesn't tell you which species it is. You just see either root knot or cyst. So we're going to try to fine tune that a little bit so we know exactly what we're dealing with in some of these real problem fields. And with that, if you have a question, I didn't talk a whole lot about fungicides. I've seen, I know a lot of people have sprayed fungicides. If you're going to spray, if you've got wet weather, wet humid conditions, and your beans are in the R3 to R5 stage, if that's the window you spray in. I don't recommend spraying before that, and I don't recommend spraying after that. And in some cases, you may see a yield benefit from it. I can't guarantee a yield benefit from it, but sometimes you do get a yield benefit from it, especially if you've got a variety that is not resistant to frog eye or cercospora leaf blight.